Okay, so everyone's heard about Tesla, right? I mean, they're practically a household name by now. But I gotta say, the EV world, it's about to get way more interesting.
It really is, yeah. What's really grabbing my attention is this whole wave of Chinese EV brands hitting the scene. And they're not just playing catch up, they're coming in with a whole new game plan. And a big part of that, affordability.
You know, when I was digging into the articles and research you sent over, I was honestly blown away. The sheer scale of what's happening in China, it's mind-boggling. New companies popping up left and right, and those prices, I mean, come on. Is this really the beginning of a total shakeup in the global auto industry?
It very well could be. I mean, think about this. 1 in every 3 cars built on the entire planet, built in China.
Wow, that's a crazy stat. So what's driving this EV explosion over there?
Well, for starters, the Chinese domestic market is absolutely flooded with EVs at this point. So flooded, in fact, that they're now exporting them like crazy. And here's the kicker. Not that long ago, China was known for making, low-cost goods, but now they're a major player in one of the most high-tech industries out there.
It's like they completely flipped the script on everyone. But those prices, they're a huge part of the equation, right? CNBC did some head-to-head comparisons, and they found that a BYD Tang SUV, this thing's loaded with features, comparable to a Tesla Model Y, is a full $11,000 cheaper.
Yeah, that price difference is pretty eye-opening. And it's not just about cheaper labor costs. BYD, for example, they're vertically integrated. They actually make their own batteries.
Hold on, they don't rely on outside suppliers for the battery. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It means they have more control over costs, a more reliable supply chain. They're not as vulnerable to the same shortages that some other EV makers are dealing with.
So they're cutting costs, potentially avoiding supply chain headaches, all at the same time. It's like they've cracked the code on making EVs accessible to way more people.
Sure.
Imagine a spacious 7-seater EV, tons of features, for a fraction of the price of a Tesla. That's got to be shaking things up.
It definitely is. And it makes you wonder how they can offer such competitive prices without skimping on quality.
That's what I was thinking. But from what I saw in those CNBC test drives, it doesn't seem like these Chinese EVs are just cheap knockoffs. They've got some serious features, the kind of stuff people actually want in their cars. We're talking seat ventilation, AI parking assistance, range extenders for road trips, even in-car fridges.
It seems like they've really tapped into what drivers are looking for on a day-to-day basis and figured out how to deliver those features at a price point that makes sense.
I was especially impressed with what CNBC had to say about the smart features. They were talking about how these EVs are becoming like connected devices within a larger ecosystem. Did you get that sense too?
Absolutely. This is where Chinese EV makers are really pushing the envelope. You've got companies like NIO developing battery swapping technology.
Wait, battery swapping, what's that?
So picture this. You pull into a station, robotic arm swaps out your depleted battery for a fully charged one. Takes just a few minutes.
Hold on, so no more waiting around for hours to recharge? That's insane. But how widely available are these swapping stations? Is it like finding a gas station, or is it still pretty limited?
Good question. The tech itself is super exciting. Could be a total game changer, especially for people worried about range anxiety. But yeah, the infrastructure needs to catch up.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so besides swapping batteries on the fly, what other cool tech are these Chinese EVs packing? I know CNBC mentioned something about an AI assistant called Nomi. Apparently, it's surprisingly human-like.
Yeah, Nomi's getting a lot of buzz. CNBC even said it cracks jokes. It really shows how much emphasis these Chinese EV makers are putting on the whole user experience, making sure the tech is seamless, intuitive, even fun to use.
It sounds like they're aiming to create a whole driving experience that's connected, convenient, maybe even a bit entertaining.
Exactly. It's not just about the car itself. It's about the entire ecosystem around it.
Okay, but it can't all be sunshine and roses, right? CNBC's test drives did highlight some areas where these Chinese EVs might not be quite there yet. Apparently, some models lack the performance refinement of a Tesla, particularly when it comes to handling.
Yeah, and that raises an interesting question. Is this a deliberate choice? Are they prioritizing cost and those cool features over top-tier performance? Or are they just not quite there yet in some areas?
That's a good question. And then there's the whole design quirks thing that CNBC mentioned. Oddly placed steering wheel, squeaky seats. It's almost endearing, like they're still working out some kinks.
It's true. Those little quirks definitely give them some personality. Maybe people are getting tired of the same old car designs and want something a bit different.
It's true. Sometimes those imperfections can make something feel more unique, more human. But quirks aside, It seems like these Chinese EV makers are on a roll. But can they keep up this momentum? Can they really go head-to-head with the big players on a global scale?
That is the million-dollar question. And there are definitely some hurdles they'll need to clear. For one, can they maintain these incredibly low prices without government subsidies?
Yeah, that's a big one. What happens when those subsidies disappear? And what about all those tech-heavy features that seem to be a hit in China? Will those resonate with consumers in other markets? I mean, tastes can vary so much from country to country.
For sure. And then there's the whole issue of brand perception. Can they overcome any skepticism that might exist towards brands from certain countries? Can they convince people who are loyal to established brands like Toyota or GM to give a Chinese EV a shot?
The CNBC video definitely highlighted that challenge, suggesting it's going to be a major uphill battle for these Chinese brands to break through in markets where there's already so much brand loyalty.
And then there's the question of long-term viability. Some of these features and business models, like that battery swapping we talked about, still unproven at a large scale.
That's true. It's all well and good on paper, but can they really make it work in the real world? Consistently and on a massive scale.
That was a definite concern raised in the video. Will these innovations stand the test of time, or will they fade away as the EV landscape keeps evolving? It's a fast-moving industry. What's revolutionary today could be outdated tomorrow.
It's like we're watching the evolution of the car unfold right in front of our eyes, and it's happening at warp speed. But are Chinese EVs just a flash in the pan? Or are they really the future of the industry? It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's clear. They're a force to be reckoned with.
No doubt about it. They've really shaken up the market with their affordability, their willingness to innovate, their sheer determination.
They're pushing the boundaries of what an EV can be and forcing the traditional automakers to step up their game. And you know what? That's ultimately a good thing for everyone who wants to drive electric. More competition means more choices, better prices, a faster pace of innovation.
I totally agree. It's a win-win for consumers and for the planet.
Okay, so even if you're not ready to trade in your gas guzzler for a Chinese EV just yet, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on what's happening in this market. Things are changing fast, and the automotive landscape could look very different in just a few years.
Absolutely. What's happening in China right now is a game changer. It has the potential to transform how we think about personal transportation. It's a really exciting time to be following the EV industry.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture, how big China's EV market is, their focus on affordability, some of those cool tech innovations, and the challenges they face going global. But now I'm curious, what's it actually like to drive one of these cars?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. Those CNBC videos you sent actually had some pretty detailed accounts of what it was like behind the wheel.
Okay, so what stood out to you? What were the highlights?
Well, one thing to remember is that the Chinese market, they often have different priorities than, say, drivers in the US or Europe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Different markets, different needs.
Exactly. Like, for example, in China, comfort and practicality, often bigger priorities than sporty handling.
Which, knowing the traffic situations in some of those megacities, totally makes sense. You're not exactly zipping around mountain curves in rush hour over there.
Right. So while some of the reviewers said, some Chinese EVs might not have that, like, super precise handling you'd get from a Tesla, they often make up for it in other areas.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Like what?
Well, for example, some models have these super advanced suspension systems. They're designed for comfort. They just glide over bumps and potholes. And apparently that's a big deal in a lot of Chinese cities where the roads can be pretty rough.
Ah, so it's about adapting to the real-world driving conditions over there, not just chasing performance specs on paper.
Exactly. And it's not just about suspension either. The CNBC folks also pointed out how rear passenger comfort is huge in China.
Wait, why is that?
It's pretty common for car owners in China to have chauffeurs. So features like those really roomy back seats, seats that recline,
Yeah.
Even built-in massage functions, those are all big selling points.
Whoa, like a luxury lounge back there. That's a whole other level of pampering I hadn't even thought about.
And it highlights something really important about the Chinese EV market. They're not just trying to copy what everyone else is doing. They're innovating based on their own context, their own culture, what their drivers actually want.
That's a really good point. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to EV design, which makes me think about those design quirks the CNBC folks mentioned. Did those stand out to you at all?
Oh, totally. I think those little quirks actually give those cars a lot of personality.
Refresh my memory. What were some of those quirks?
Well, one that stood out was the steering wheel placement in some models. Apparently, it can be positioned a bit higher and closer to the dashboard than what we're used to.
Not exactly standard design in most of the cars out there. Do you think it's a cultural thing or just a choice those particular manufacturers make?
Could be a bit of both, honestly. But it's a good example of how Chinese EV makers are willing to shake things up, challenge those conventions of car design.
I like that. They're not afraid to be different. Now, what about those squeaky seats CNBC mentioned? Were those just isolated incidents, or is there something to that?
Yeah, they did talk about that. It seems like some of the materials, while generally good quality, might not always be as durable or put together with the same level of precision as, say, a high-end European luxury car.
Okay, so maybe some growing pains there
Mm.
in terms of fine-tuning the details. But honestly, part of me finds those imperfections kind of endearing.
I know what you mean. It's like those little quirks that make something feel more human, more relatable. It's not this, flawless image of unattainable perfection.
Exactly. And it makes sense when you think about it. This is a young industry. They're moving fast, trying new things. There are bound to be a few bumps in the road. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. Those quirks give it personality. Shows they're not so worried about being perfect. They're focused on innovating, being accessible, and that sometimes means embracing those little imperfections along the way.
It's refreshing, honestly. Okay, so stepping back from those little details for a sec, what's the overall takeaway from those CNBC test drives? What kind of impression do you get of the driving experience as a whole?
I think the main takeaway is this: Chinese EVs are a seriously viable alternative to what's already out there. They're not perfect, no car is.
Yeah.
But they're well made, they're packed with features, and they offer this different kind of driving experience, one that prioritizes different things. It's like they're saying, hey, here's another way to think about what an EV can be. And they're doing it at a price point that's making the whole market sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
But can they really keep this momentum going? Can they take on those big, established, global automakers?
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here, from how huge China's EV market is to what it's like to actually get behind the wheel. But before we wrap up, I want to zoom out a little bit. Think big picture.
Sounds good. Where are we zooming to?
Well, we've talked about how Chinese EV makers are shaking things up, challenging the status quo, pushing everyone to innovate, right? But I'm wondering, what does this all actually mean for the future of transportation?
The million-dollar question.
Mhm.
And there are so many possibilities. I mean, what if this whole trend toward affordable, tech-heavy EVs really takes off globally? That's a huge what if.
It is. It's not just about swapping out, gas guzzlers for electric ones. It could completely change how we think about cars, about getting around, about transportation as a whole. Absolutely. It could transform the whole idea of car ownership. I mean, we're already seeing that happening a bit with, ride sharing, subscription services. But imagine if owning a car became less common, maybe even obsolete for some people, because EVs are so much cheaper and easier to get.
Wow. That's a big change. So instead of everyone having their own car, we'd have more shared mobility options, autonomous vehicles, maybe super efficient public transit systems that are all electric.
Exactly. And then think about what that does to cities. Suddenly you need less parking, which frees up space for, housing, parks. Maybe there's less traffic if people are using shared autonomous fleets that are optimized for efficiency.
It's like a chain reaction.
Uh-huh.
One change leads to another, and you're looking at a completely different city.
And it's not just cities. Think about the impact on our energy grid. Imagine a world where all these EVs aren't just using energy, but they're part of a smart grid. They're storing energy and then feeding it back into the system when it's needed.
So we're talking about a total transformation, not just how we get from point A to point B, but how our cities are planned, how we power our lives. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And it shows how something like, the rise of Chinese EVs isn't just some isolated trend. It's part of this much bigger, more interconnected system that has the potential to, change everything.
It makes you think, what other unexpected shifts might be just around the corner? What new tech or innovations could totally reshape the world, and we just haven't even imagined them yet?
That's what I love about this moment, so much rapid change and innovation, so much potential. It's up to all of us to, be curious, explore all these possibilities, and help shape that future in a positive way.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, dear listener, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Chinese EVs.
We hope you've gotten a better understanding of this fascinating, fast-moving market, and maybe it's even made you think a little differently about what the future of transportation could hold.
If there's one thing we want you to take away from this episode, it's this. Stay curious, keep an open mind, and don't be afraid to challenge those assumptions. The future's full of possibilities. And it's up to all of us to explore them and make smart choices that benefit everyone. Ourselves, our communities, and the planet.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thanks for coming along on this wild ride with us.
Yeah.
And until next time, happy driving.